In this architectural photography editing video, what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you my complete workflow in Lightroom. So my challenge is how I can get this photograph looking as good as I possibly can in Lightroom to get it sent back to my client. So before we start the editing, let's understand a little bit about the file itself. So I'm shooting this on a tripod. I've used the virtual horizon inside of my camera so that I know that I'm actually nice and straight in spite of the fact that it looks like everything's a bit wonky here. I shot this photograph at 16mm. I was as far back against the house as I could actually get because the actual homestead itself wraps around, so my back was right up against the wall here, so I couldn't get any further back. So 16mm was what I needed to make sure that I could capture into the home here and also the swimming pool as well. So it's quite a wide angle, but for this courtyard space it was actually really important to include the pool and the actual home itself. You can see that we've shot this at f11, so I should have a nice sharp area in the foreground and also a nice sharp crispness right through to the back there as well. So that's really awesome. I'm at ISO 100, so the file shouldn't be too noisy, but obviously because so much of this is in shadow based on the fact that I shot this when the sun had already set, when I increase the exposure in those shadow areas, as I will demonstrate here, we're going to see that when we zoom in, things are a little bit noisy. So there you can see on the wood, we can recover it, but we are also introducing quite a bit of noise. And before I start working on any file, I like to understand what the limitations of that file are. So what I mean by that is how much dynamic range is in this photo. So you may look at this, if you'd shot this as a JPEG, there is no way you'd be bringing back that sort of level of detail. Things would start to fall apart really quickly. You wouldn't be able to boost the exposure up and actually recover this detail. So obviously always shoot in RAW when you're doing this sort of work. We've already seen that we can recover the shadows nicely, but let's see what about the opposite. If we drop this down, okay, we can go all the way right to this very brightest part here. There's so much information in this file, we've got enough to create a full edit. As you can see in my film strip down the bottom here, I also shot a darker version of this photo and a lighter version as well. So you may look at this file and think this is a much better one to work with. The exposure is so much more accurate for the home. And yes, it is. But what you'll see is if I grab the exposure slider and bring that to the right, I haven't got the color information in the sky. We're pretty much completely blown out through here. And the fact that we had that beautiful sunset was really important. So in theory, I could work on this file and I've got enough information to bring back everything I need. But for the sake of retaining as much quality in the photo as I possibly can, what I'm going to do is use Lightroom's merge to HDR function. And what that's going to do is bring these three photographs together and give me a little bit more information in the shadows. So when I boost up that exposure, there's going to be less noise, less digital grain, as it were, in those shadow areas, and we're going to have a much cleaner file. So I'm going to right click on these. I'm going to come to Photo Merge HDR. Lightroom's going to generate a preview for me. And as you can see, with the auto settings on, it's done a pretty good job of rendering a quite nice file. But what I want to do is actually show you how we can have a little bit more control over that. So I'm not going to use the auto settings in this case. I'm just going to merge it as it is. Make sure I've got de-ghosting on so that if anything's moved, such as leaves being blown by wind, that won't affect it. And although I'm shooting on a tripod, just in case there was any slight movement, if I bump the tripod or anything like that, I always leave auto align on so that we can guarantee we've got a nice sharp merge. So I'll just click merge and Lightroom will create a 32-bit HDR file for me to work with. So when you're photographing architecture and real estate, particularly when things are nighttime and you've got a lot of contrast between the highlights and the shadows, certainly do a bracketed set on a tripod so that you've got options to deal with the shadows and the highlights. This is certainly by no means the only way to work with bracketed sets of images. I've got videos on luminosity blending in Photoshop, and I've also done them on using HDR software such as Aurora, which in my opinion is the best one for actually creating a realistic result. But from our point of view, editing in Lightroom, starting with a file that has the maximum amount of data in it when we start is paramount. So let's get into the edit. So let's give ourselves a little bit more screen real estate. We're going to get rid of the top bar because we're just going to be working in the develop module, and I'm closing down my presets as well because I want to build this from the ground up so you guys can see exactly how you can do this as well. So the first thing we want to do is apply a profile. So let's come to the browse section, and I will always choose a camera matching profile. What you have available to you may look different to what I see here because it's all based on the camera model and what the camera manufacturer has actually supplied to Adobe. But what you want to do here, you want to start with the flattest profile you can possibly find because that's going to give you the most latitude to work with the high dynamic range. If you see, if I click on landscape, which is quite a contrasty profile, you'll see the histogram straight away drops the blacks, boosts the highlights. And that's not really what we want to do. We want to start with something that's flatter like this, and you can see we've got a more even histogram now, and we can actually introduce the contrast where we want it. It's going to give us more control. So let's close that down. Now, for the most part, I think that working top down in Lightroom makes the most sense, but there is something that we need to do first, and that is address the lens correction and the transform aspect. So we want to get our geometry right before we start playing with things like the exposure and stuff like that. So open up the lens correction. We want to remove chromatic aberration to get rid of any of those strange color abnormalities that you get around particularly the edges of the frame, and we also want to, very importantly, enable profile correction. So did you see that pop? So when I turn this off and I turn it on again, you'll see that all of those bowed lines that we had before, kind of barrel distortion that's called, by turning this on, that disappears. And now all of our lines are nice and straight. So that gives us a really good kickstart for getting the geometry of this shot correct. From here, we're going to jump into the transform section, and in here we can use the auto tool to see if that corrects things, but Lightroom, to be honest, doesn't do a particularly good with automatic. You can also click full and try that, but that's even worse. So what I recommend doing is coming into the guided section, and this is going to allow us to draw 4 lines that depict 2 for our verticals, 2 for our horizontal. And you want to go right to the edge of the frame and find a straight line close to the edge of the frame. And normally a nice long line is good. So we could actually do this here. We could come along the edge of the sort of pergola area here and let go. So that's our first line. And our second line we will put over this side here on this paneling here. And I can just about see that, so I'll let go there. And just like that, we've got our verticals corrected. Our verticals are now absolutely precise. If you're fortunate enough to own a tilt shift lens, you may have been able to shoot this perfectly with perfect verticals and perfect horizontals in camera. However, I personally sacrifice that because I like to have the option to have a zoom. So most tilt shift lenses, or all of them as far as I know, are a fixed focal length. So I like that I have my 16 to 35mm, and it's no big deal for me to actually come in and draw 4 lines in Lightroom and actually correct this. But part of the key to doing this and getting it right is you don't want to have any extreme geometry abnormalities. Like, you don't want to be tilting your camera too far up, too far down, anything like that. You want to keep the back of the camera as parallel as you can, like 90 degrees to the floor as you possibly can. Okay, so now we've got our transformation of the geometry really good. So let's turn this off and turn it on. So here we've gone from something where the horizon is actually absolutely perfect. I know that because I used the virtual horizon in my camera, but still, in spite of that, we still have a lot of abnormalities in the verticals and the horizontals. So when we turn this on, we've corrected that. If we want to, we now have the option to shift our image around. So we can use the X offset to actually shift left and right. So if I wanted to get the very edge of this pool in, which I think is quite important, just not to have that disappearing off the edge of the frame like it is there, I'm just going to move this over ever so slightly. And we can also shift the y-axis up and down as well, but I'm happy with it how it is. So the next step is to create some really nice overall global adjustments, and we can do that with our sliders within Lightroom here. And then the second phase, which is really important, is to actually use some local adjustments to control specific areas. So I'll be able to actually bring back a bit more color and deepen that beautiful rich sunset that we had before. So first of all, let's dive into our global adjustments. I'm going to bring our exposure up a wee bit just so that we're starting to get a little bit more of a correct exposure or a nicer exposure on the building itself. And now let's work with our highlights and shadows. As we bring the highlights back down, you can see that because we're using now a 32-bit high dynamic range file, we can actually bring back heaps of that detail. And if you remember that nice bright file that had a good exposure on that building that I showed you before, when we tried to bring the highlights down or the exposure down, we had no detail in the sky, but now we do, so that's great. I'm not going to concern myself right now with the fact that we're losing contrast as I bring the detail out. My primary goal here is just to make sure that I've got detail throughout the image. And so by moving the highlights and the shadows there, I think we're in a pretty good place. My next step is I want to make sure that our histogram stretches all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So the right hand side of the histogram, that represents the highlights. So I'm going to grab the whites and I'll just push it really fast so you can see. As I push that to the right, we bleach things out. As we push it to the left, we darken things down. So what I want to do is just make sure that our whites are starting right at the very right hand side of the histogram here. And a good way to see that is actually just turn on this warning dialog box here and click this triangle here for the shadows. And now when I move this up, you can see it gives me a warning when I've peaked out at pure white. So I don't really want to do that. So I'll just bring that back. I'm not worried about just a little bit there. That's pretty good. Now I'm going to bring the blacks down, and by doing that, we're going to get ourselves a bit more contrast back into the image. And just like with the whites, if I start getting a little bit of a warning going on, I'm not too concerned if it's in an area that I don't really care about, like this area down here. It's not like I want detail in this pillar at all. So the fact that I'm just starting to get a little blue warning there, that's fine. So we're heading in the right direction. Let's have a quick look where we've come from and where we've got to. So this is our before. This is the HDR merge before we've made any adjustments. And this is where we've got to. So our before and our after. Let's start to have a look at the texture and the clarity. I'm not a huge fan of adding texture into the architectural shots, but we can add it just a little bit, just tickle it in. Clarity is normally a good option, particularly for architecture. But if I push it all the way to 100, you'll see that what it's doing is actually increasing the contrast. It's increasing the local contrast, but now that's pushing more of our blacks towards black and pushing our whites up. And things are just looking a little odd if you go too far with this. To reset it, I'm going to double click the little triangle here. And that does look much better, but perhaps we want a little bit of that effect. So I'm just going to get the clarity slider and just start wiggling it back and forth, keeping my eye on the picture. And when I feel like I'm in a good space and I'm happy with how it's looking, just let go. I'm not concerned with what the number is. I just want it to look good on the picture. And now I see we're at plus 25. That's all good. I'm going to turn off the clipping warnings. So click that and click that. They're gone. And now let's move on to color. So if we grab the vibrance slider and start pushing that up, we can see what's going on with the colors there. So I might just increase that just a little bit. And the saturation, if we push that up as well, let's see what's happening. Really, it's getting a little bit of an unbelievable kind of look when we push that too far. I don't really like that. So I'm just going to maybe just tickle in just a little bit of that. Now I missed out the dehaze slider, and this doesn't always work too well, but I found with the HDR files, when you've done a merged HDR in Lightroom and you start to increase that, normally you do get a better result than you do if you do it on just a standard file straight from your camera. But I'm just going to add a little bit of that. Now, while I'm not going to add too much of it, what I do want you to note is if I push this to the right, look at the sky, see how rich and colorful the sky is getting just by moving that dehaze slider up. And that's important for me to remember that, because I might be able to utilize that just through like a localized mask. So rather than applying a really heavy-handed dehaze to the whole image, I might be able to just start to introduce it just into the sky. So I'm going to bring that back down and just remember, oh yeah, I might want to add some dehaze to the sky. Okay, now we're on to the tone curve. Let's jump into here. Now the tone curve is a really great place for adding contrast. If you're not familiar with the tone curve, I have another video and I'll link to that in the top corner at the moment. So if you want to watch that, click on that video or check it out after this one. But that explains exactly how the tone curve works. But basically, if we click on the line here and we move the point up, that is going to brighten things up. When you move it down, it darkens things. And the left-hand side of the tone curve represents the shadows. So if I grab this point here and bring that up, you can see that we're brightening the shadows. And if I grab the right hand side and bring that down, you can see that we can control the highlights. So with that knowledge, we're able to manipulate the brightness values within our photograph. And I'll show you the easiest way to do that. But first of all, I'm going to double click this point here to remove it. And in the top left hand corner, you can see this little icon here that says adjust point curve by dragging in the photo. So we want to click this point here. And now we can basically talk to any brightness value in the photo by clicking on it. So let's click on the roof here, and we can either brighten that or darken it down. So if I want to darken the sky, I could click here and just bring that down slightly. The same goes for the interior. If I wanted to darken or brighten parts of the interior, I can click and drag. But you need to be really careful, because if you end up getting too many points close together on the curve, things start to go a little bit strange. And if you put a point on there that you don't want, just double click it and that will remove it. And to check out what your curve is doing, you can just toggle the curve off and on, off and on, and I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to jump into the color section, and this section is brilliant for neutralizing color casts and things like that, because we can talk directly into a particular color. So for example, if we feel like the oranges and yellows are just a little bit too saturated, we can just grab the saturation for the orange and just reduce it. So you can see that takes out all the saturation from the wood as well, which isn't really what we want, but we certainly don't want things as saturated as what they are. So what we can do is just ease it off a little bit, and we can come into the yellows and see if we can do the same there as well. At the moment, it looks like the swimming pool is far more saturated than anything else in the frame. So what I might do is just come into the blue and just see if we can ease that back. And you can see how quickly we can reduce that saturation from the blue just by dropping it ever so slightly. If you actually want to adjust the color of the hue itself, like the blue, we can actually shift the hue more towards a cyan, or you can take it towards a purple, and you can do that with any color. So this is a really powerful tool. So I may actually just introduce a little bit more cyan look in that pool. I think that looks a little bit better just with a tiny bit of cyan. So let's turn that effect off and on, and we're just neutralizing some of those colors a little bit. So before, I think things are a little bit too oversaturated, and then after, I think we're in a little bit more of a space of believability. Things are a bit more neutral, and I think it looks better. Now, these decisions I'm making, they're subjective, and what I think looks better, you may not agree with me, and that's fine. What I'm wanting to do is actually just introduce you to the tools and the techniques, and then you can do what you like. Like, you might prefer a pool that looks nice and pink like this. So hopefully you can embrace the process and what I'm showing you here, and don't get too hung up on whether or not you agree with the direction I'm taking the photo. Now, beyond this color section, we now have a color grading tool within Lightroom. From my point of view, I think this whole section needs to be left alone for architecture. It's a great tool and it's brilliant for more creative work, but if you've got a slight color cast that you need to correct, it's much better that you address it within the basic panel and the color temperature. I've got this set as shot at the moment because I was pretty happy with that, but you have the option to grab these sliders and play around with them how you want. And now I'm doing that, I'm actually thinking I might actually just cool this off a little bit, because it's just enhancing those blues, and it's also helping to dull down the oranges inside the property. So that was a little bit of a fortuitous jump into this section. Right, let's jump into detail now. Now, I will do the sharpening here, but I just want to say that I don't normally do sharpening through Lightroom. A while back, I started using a really powerful application called Luminar AI, and I've found that the AI sharpening within that does such a better job than the detail and sharpening section within Lightroom. So I don't like to double up on it, because I normally put every single photo I edit through Luminar just as a finishing touch. But for the sake of thoroughness, we are going to look at sharpening in Lightroom. So I'm going to zoom in, because that's the most important thing we need to do, so we can actually see things at 100%. And straight away, if you look at the wood here that we looked at before when we boosted the brightness up to around this sort of level, there was a lot of digital noise going on in there. It looked pretty ugly. But now, thanks to the fact that we merged those three photos, we've got a really nice smooth file to work with. So let's increase the sharpening as a starting point. I find that architecture can handle a little bit more aggressive sharpening than other things can, particularly say like portraits, for example. So we can be pretty aggressive with this. I also like to increase the radius just a little bit. I find that around 1.5 works quite well for my sensor size and my lens. The higher your resolution on your camera, the higher you can push the radius and get away with it. Whereas if you've got a pretty low resolution, first of all, I'd be very careful shooting architecture with a low resolution, because when things get blown up in magazines and things, you'll get found out and your client won't be very happy. But bigger sensors can handle just a little bit more radius. So let's turn that off and turn it on, and we've gone from something that's pretty soft looking straight out of camera just to something that's really, really nice and sharp. So this is our before, this is our after, and it normally pays just to have a little scoot around the frame and just check that you're happy with how things are looking. Now I can see here on the glass we've got a handprint, so I'm just going to fix that up. I'm going to use the spot removal in healing mode tool and just paint roughly over that. If you want to, you can mask your sharpening, and one of the best ways to see how that's affecting the file is just to hold the Alt key or Option on a Mac, and as you start to move that up, you can see the white area is where the sharpening will be applied and the black area it won't be. So you can move that up and just have a play around with that and get that to a point where you feel pretty happy, because you don't want to introduce undue noise into your file if you don't have to. So here's our before and here's our after with the mask applied. If your file is starting to look a little noisy, you can just introduce just a small amount of noise reduction. You basically want to just get rid of that grain, but you don't want to do it at the expense of the sharpness of the photo. Sometimes if you push the noise reduction up too far, you'll need to revisit the sharpening and then sort of like counterbalance that by increasing the sharpening amount as well. But you can see here on the wood, by increasing the noise reduction, we've lost all that detail in the wood, so that's not really what I want to do. And because I've merged an HDR file and we've got a 32-bit file we're working with here, that noise is really minimal anyway. So let's come out of the clone healing tool, let's zoom back out by pressing Z, and we are going to press the / key to see our before, and press it again to see our after. So we've got our before, we've got our after, and if you consider where we came from, I think we're looking pretty good. So part one of our processing was looking at things on a global scale, moving the sliders, and that's affecting the whole picture. The next step that we want to look at is the localized adjustments, and this is super powerful. And I love the radial filter, that's super cool, and also the graduated filter as well. I rarely use the adjustment brush. I think these two, with enough feathering so they have a really nice soft transition, you can get away with using both of those and they're much quicker. So let's start with the graduated filter, and I'm just going to click and drag down. So to demonstrate the effect of this filter best, I'm going to do some extreme change. I'm going to reduce the exposure quite heavily, and we're going to change the color up there as well. Let's push it all the way to the blue. So now you can see that we have an exposure drop of -4 and the temperature come down to the blue side. And that change is happening at 100% above this line here. It's then feathering off to 0 at this line here, the bottom line. And in the middle, where the pin is, the controller point, that is 50%. And we can move this around using this pinpoint. So I'm just going to start my gradient at the very top of the sky. I'm going to make sure it's pretty much parallel and start it at the top and have it feather off down here. Now I'm just going to reset the effect that we did here, and you can do that by holding Alt or Option on a Mac, and when you do that, this little word here, effect, becomes reset. So we can just click that and reset it. You can also see where your local adjustment filter is by pressing the O key on your keyboard, and that will give you a red overlay. So you can see now that that transition goes from 100% here and just feathers off to 0 here. So now we've got the gradient in place, we can control our sky, which I feel is just a little bit overexposed. So we will bring the exposure down. I may just push the temperature towards that blue, just a little bit, not too much. And I'm going to grab the contrast slider and just see whether by pushing that, yeah, we get a lot more interest going on in the sky. Let's go somewhere around that 50 mark. And at the bottom of the effect box here, you've got a little toggle switch here. So I'm going to turn that off and turn it on, and that's always a good idea to do that just to check exactly what you're doing. So this was our before, this was our after. I'm happy with that. So this part of the process is where I like to actually control the viewer's attention and the viewer's eye, so I can guide them. And one of the principles that I apply to do this is that our eye goes to the brightest part of an image. So if we want somebody to look somewhere, we can increase the brightness in that area. We can also increase the contrast in that area. And conversely, if you don't want somebody to look somewhere in an image, you can reduce contrast and you can make it darker. So with that in mind, I'm going to make a couple of changes. I am going to grab another gradient and I'm going to click and drag up from the bottom. And if you hold the shift key, what that's going to do is constrain the filter to right angles. So I know that I can be nice and straight along the bottom there. And the effect that it's applying is what we did last of all. So what I'm going to do again is just quickly reset that. And now all I want to do is just reduce the exposure just along that part of the wood there, just because it was feeling a little bit bright before and our eye was going straight to it. But you can also control other aspects. So I feel like the actual timber itself is just looking a little bit flat, so I might want to add a little bit more contrast, perhaps even a little bit of clarity. The right hand side of the image over here shows the next door neighbor's house, and it's a beautiful home, but we don't really want our viewer looking at what the builder's competitors have been building. So let's grab a radial filter this time, and we're just going to draw an ellipse over this area here. And at the moment we've got a +45. And what we need to do is just reduce the exposure slightly, and that's going to darken that area off. We can also reduce the contrast as well, just so that we're trying to control our viewer's eye, and we're saying this left-hand side, this home here is much more exciting and worth looking at than this area here. And so with that in mind, let's draw another radial filter here. It's already set at boosting the exposure just ever so slightly, but let's see what else we can do. Let's increase the contrast a little bit, maybe increase the shadows and drop the blacks just a smidge. Maybe we want to boost the whites up slightly, maybe a little bit more texture just in the home itself. And let's grab that clarity slider and a little bit of dehaze. Maybe we do want to saturate that area as well, just saying, hey, look, this is important, look over here. So now by using this toggle switch here, we can see the effect of our radial filters. That's without it, that's with it. And you can see it's almost like flipping your eye from left to right. So before we had a bright area over here, and this was quite dull, and basically we've switched that. So we've said this area is brighter now on the left hand side, look here, and then don't look over here, and made it darker. Just to further demonstrate the use of radial filters, I'm going to do something a little more creative. I'm going to grab and drag in this top right hand corner of the photo, and I love the fact that the setting sun has created this pink glow up here. And if you remember before, when we grabbed the dehaze amount, it really sort of increased that saturation and contrast up there. So if I do that, you can see, whoa, looks like some sky out of Stranger Things, so we won't do that. We're going to ease this back, but certainly by increasing that dehaze a little bit, it's just adding a little bit more interest up there in the sky. And we can combine this effect by, as we're increasing that and it's adding more contrast and saturation, it's darkening things down which we might not want, so we can balance that just by bringing the exposure back up. We could also play with the temperature if we want, so we could actually make this more of a orangey warm hue. And again, we can just have a little toggle of our before and our after, and I'm feeling like it's a little bit too much, this one. So here's another great feature. See this little arrow here? Not many people know about this. So if you click this, that's going to get rid of all of what you saw before, all of those other options inside here, and instead we now see an amount slider. So we might like the effect that we've created here, but it's just too strong. And rather than coming into each of those individual sliders and tweaking them back a little bit, we can just come to this amount slider, the overall amount, and just ease back the whole amount. So just like that, we still have the effect, but we've only got half of what it was before. So if I move this sort of out of the way and bring it back over, you can see what it's doing as I move this around. And as well as using that toggle switch that I showed you before, this is also a pretty good way to get a feel for exactly what your filters are doing, is just grab the little control point, move them out of the way, move them back, move them out of the way, and just let your eye get a feel for what it's doing and go, do I like it? Don't I like it? Have I gone too far? Have I not gone far enough? And then you can settle on a place that you feel happy with it for your image. Now, in terms of a Lightroom edit, guys, I would say that is it. So I'm quite pleased with where we've got to. So let's now see our before and after. So this is our before, where you can see we've got no detail in the sky. The detail in the home is almost black. It's very, very dark. And then this is our after. So normally when I get to this point, I step away from my computer because the chances are I may have gone too far, and I feel like I have with this one. So I might go and see my family, have a little drink, and come back with fresh eyes and just make any minor adjustments that I might need to. So sure enough, I've just made a couple of little changes here, and this was what we were just looking at before, and I've just basically taken it from this to this. So I created a virtual copy, and then within that, all I've done is just adjust the tone curve ever so slightly to give us a little bit more contrast, and I've also just dropped the exposure back just a tiny bit. And one other thing I did was I've just taken the color temperature back up slightly to what it was when the camera shot it. So this was what we edited together, and just with those tiny changes, this is the file that I'm now ready to take into Luminar and let Luminar's AI magic do its thing for me. So basically I right click here and I can come to edit in, and Luminar is accessible as a plugin as well. So I can go to edit in Luminar AI, and I'm just going to edit a copy with the adjustments that we've made. A TIFF is a great file format at 16 bits, and the color space Adobe RGB is a nice big color space, much better than RGB. So let's go with that. Click edit. Luminar AI is invoked. Loads your photo up, and from there it's really simple. I just come into templates and I choose my AT Architecture Enhancer template. And Luminar uses its AI to intelligently improve this photo. It's so cool because this will work for exteriors, interiors, basically whatever you throw at it, it will be enhanced. So if I look at our before and our after, it's pretty subtle, but you can see that we've got more contrast, the colors are enhanced, everything's just better about it. I've sent some before and afters through to several architects and designers now just to see which ones they prefer, and every single time they've come back choosing the Luminar version. So this is our before, this is our after. If you ever feel like, oh, that's just a little bit too much, you've got an amount slider in the bottom right hand corner, and you can just bring that amount down. So you might say, oh, I just want 50% of this, that's going to be enough. So before, after, it's subtle, but it's a really nice little bit of polish to put on your photo at the end. If you shoot a lot of architecture or real estate and you think this might be a good fit for your workflow, then I have a discount code and a link below. The discount code is @Sky10, link below. The great thing is you guys get to save some money, and I do get a small commission from that as well. And that just helps me keep creating free content for you guys as well. So if you want to up your photography game and deliver your clients something just that next level, Luminar is a really great tool for doing that. That link is below. I'll just really quickly show you what's under the hood. So basically, although it is AI driven, you still have access to all your tools. So for example, if I jump into the light panel here, it's very similar to Lightroom. You've got your curves and all of this stuff. So I think a lot of the presets that ship with Luminar are a little bit too heavy handed, which is okay because you can reduce that amount as I showed you. But I've built this preset myself, and I've also got a video where I show you how you can do that as well. So if you'd like to build this same preset, by all means watch that video and copy it exactly, I don't mind. So part of the heavy lifting is this accent AI. So I'll take that away, and now watch as I increase this to 100%. Just watch the photo. So as I bring this to 100%, you can see it's making intelligent decisions based on what's in my photo. It's enhancing the contrast, the saturation. I don't know how it does it, but it works just as well on architecture and landscapes and portraits, wedding photos. My mind boggles at how it does it, but I don't care how it does it. It does it, it works. So I'm really pleased with that. So let's have a quick look at our starting photo, straight out of camera. And now this is where we got to. I really hope seeing how I process these kind of photos has been beneficial to you. I hope you've learned something from this. If you have, do me a favor, please leave me a like. And if you've got any questions, leave those in the comments. And if you just want to throw a little bit of appreciation my way with a little thank you in the comments, that means the world to me. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.